Hi guys, it's Mr. Drolling, Robert. So Robert came in to visit, and drove from Mass here to New York, and we had Samhain, and I think it was awesome.
Yeah, had a good time.
And we talked yesterday till like 4 in the morning that we would try to do a video for you guys. And I figured we would come up with a couple topics, and I didn't really know where to go with some of them. And then Robert proposed an idea last night, and I was like, this is the topic. And I guess you would say it's when we're talking about sacramental versus sacrificial with things that are considered not clergy, but how would you put it?
Clergy's the word for it nowadays. Honestly, people are if you have someone who's in that role as a spiritual leader or spiritual servant, or however you want to put it, you can consider them clergy. The word's not really owned by any particular religion.
You might have to talk louder. They might not be able to hear you.
So the word's not owned by any particular religion.
So, buttons in your underwear, as I always say, because I always say soap.
I don't like buttons in my underwear.
No.
It's uncomfortable.
Got to get the cock out.
Especially if your pants are tight.
Tight pants.
Yeah.
I like tight pants.
Tight pants can be nice depending on who's wearing them.
Yeah, I guess you'd say it's a privilege, not a right.
Yeah. There's some people who should not wear tight pants, and then there are some people who just should not wear pants.
I guess we fall into I don't like pants cover. Part of the...
I like to wear a kilt, but
right.
Sometimes you want to see somebody who doesn't have pants on.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
See, this is what happens.
We were supposed to talk about clergy. There we go.
Wait, what? How did clergy lead to I don't have pants on?
Oh, come on. You were Catholic as a child. How could clergy not lead to I don't have any pants on?
Yeah. There's no pants under those robes, you know.
You checked?
I didn't have an option.
There you go.
So I'll guess just propose this to Robert. Like, if you guys were here to ask him, I'll ask on your behalf. How would you kind of define for us what you mean in the difference of what is sacrificial clergy versus what is sacramental clergy? And I guess where does Shinshrukt fall into that with our traditions with the Dururi?
Okay. Well, if you look at it from the angle of religious phenomenology, where you're studying different types of clergy people, what we see is you certainly have the teachers, the idea that clergy are teachers. You have, say, in Islam, you have the scholars who are also prayer leaders. So you have a set of scholars, and you have scholars who work as prayer leaders. And that is a clergy type role. They don't carry necessarily any type of special agency there at all. And you're going to see that in some religions, and then you're going to see, let's take the Catholic priest, for instance. With a Catholic priest, we're talking about someone who is what we would call sacramental clergy, which means that there are certain ritual acts that are reserved to that person.
Okay.
This person acts, some people will say sometimes as an intercessor, however you want to describe it, but there are certain sacraments that can only be done by the clergy. There's some sacraments that can be done by anyone.
So like communion is what is done by the clergy.
Yeah. So you've got these sacraments that are done by the clergy, and the reason that they can do those and no one else can, it has to do with their agency. Their ministerial agency is they're literally representative of deity, or representative for them, representative of God in the room.
So they're standing in place of.
They're speaking for God. They are. The easiest way to think about it is sacramental clergy represents the face of deity, of a God or of gods facing the people.
So I mean, a visual effect, you would say you're sitting at the pew at Mass, and you would see the altar, then the priest, and then the large crucifix.
Yeah.
So the focus there is we are looking to them because they are the face of, they're speaking on behalf of.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you have this idea that, and it's part of why they're called father. It's part of why they're called reverend. Some element of that which is sacred is invested in them in a special way, exclusively invested in them in a special way. And with that, you get the idea of sacramental clergy. We even see, to some extent, with say Wicca, when the high priestess, when they do drawing down the moon, and she is now at this point representing some goddess, she's become sacramental clergy.
So they draw when they would draw down, they are, in essence, they're acting as on behalf of. They're taking that on.
Now here's the thing we see. We talk about, if we're going to talk about Shinshakti, we're going to talk about Drui or Bandrui within Shinshak. We also have to just look at the continuum into the depths of the past and into the comparative Indo-European cultures. In general, while you have people who do divination or special mystics who, sit over crevices in a volcano and inhale gases and speak for the gods, okay, that's a special case. But in general, what we see from the people who manage the temples or run the religious rites is they're never seen as the face of a deity facing the people. They are always the face of the people facing the deity. They are the hands of the people making sacrifice. They are the voice of the people speaking to deities. And we call it sacrificial clergy. They're called sacrificial clergy because they're performing sacrifices. They're experts in it. They're trained in it. They oversee those things to make sure the right actions are taken.
Right.
But their role is not the representative of deity. Their role, their agency, their ministerial agency does not come from deity. Their role as a ministerial agency, it comes from the people. We see that with true Protestants, not pseudo-Protestants. Like the Anglican Church is kind of semi-Protestant. They want to say themselves, well, how does someone put it? They're not really Catholic, but they listen to everything the Pope says just in case. But when we're talking about, let's talk about true Protestants, let's talk about Lutherans and stuff, their ministers are not seen as representatives of deity for them. Their ministers do not have that agency from deity. They are a minister, their agency is from the people.
Because I guess in Catholicism you have that, the trickle-down effect of like the Pope and then cardinals and then bishops to priests in such a way to even in Catholicism you don't interpret the Bible. It is told to you and this is what it is, where I guess in Lutheranism there is some sort of Bible study. You sit down with the minister or reverend or whoever.
And then in Islam and Judaism, interpretation of the text that they see is of prime import. They have specialists who study the text and sit around and discuss, what does this text mean? What does this text mean today? And that is their tradition, and that's kind of what we do with looking at our ancient myths. We sit around and we look at what it possibly means, the different things it can mean, and we discuss, I'm getting this from it, I'm getting that from it. We don't have this idea of, this is a sacred text. It was written down 1,000 years ago, and da-da-da-da-da. Yeah, you do run into people who do that, but you ignore the idiots, so... but anyway...
Don't feed the trolls, guys.
Back to that difference between sacrificial and sacramental clergy. That really is it. The point is that sacrificial clergy, their agency, their ministerial agency, is they represent the people. They're the voice of the people to the gods. And what that also means is there is no ritual act that is exclusively, the stutter's trying to sneak back in, that is exclusively reserved to the hand of the Drui. Anyone, your smallest child, can perform any of those acts. If you explain to them how to do it, if they manage to do it, it's done. You want those acts to be done properly. So the priests, the drui, the bandrui, they're trained to do them, or they're experienced
On
in
the
doing
behalf
them
of the people.
because they've been doing them again on the behalf of the people. Exactly.
So like in ritual case, you would, like we often do in Samhain, like we did. People bring the offerings, and on their behalf, as they're collected, then we offer on their
Right.
behalf with their intentions.
But in ritual, you can have people make their own offerings. You can have people help with the offerings. When we did the waters yesterday, I had people who have never been in ritual with us come forward and hold the different types of waters that were being mixed, and they mixed them, and that involved them in the ritual, because there is no sacramental function that's going to be reserved to you or to me or to anyone special. And as long as it's being done appropriately, because it is really about right action in the performance of those rites, those rituals, those ceremonies. So that is the biggest difference. That's the important difference that people they're not really clear on, and we've seen that in the pagan community. For me, seeing it in the pagan community for 40 years, of people not getting that. And you
Like
see
when people take
start
up
to think of themselves as representative of the gods, and
That's
you've
dangerous.
seen there was a
Ethigomania.
major Celtic Reconstructionist or Gaelic Revivalist organization a decade and a half ago. It was operating 2 decades ago. That blew itself apart basically because the leaders started to get what you would call the police officer's delusion. I am the law.
I am the law.
I speak the law. And what I say goes. And he started to get that basic delusion. And that is, not only is that not realistically seen within Gaelic culture, and I know people are going to write comments and say, what about the idea of the truth of the king? The idea of the truth of the king is the truth of the king went in conjunction with the law. It never overruled the law. So you don't even need to send that comment, but feel free to. That's really basically, that was the model throughout Indo-European culture.
Yeah, you do kind of see that.
It got twisted
Yeah,
into a new shape as certain people developed.
Like the Germanic tribes eventually
they
developed
eventually
it.
started having strongman leadership, and
Right.
the Romans, even eventually the Republic was subsumed into the imperial system, where they had a strongman system. Different Greek city-states went in slightly different directions depending on where you are, whether it's Athens, Sparta, the Thespians, whatever you get, you've got each one had its slight variations, but the earliest models that we see that are in common is really that idea
That the sacrificial is a direct line from Indo-European.
the sacrificial clergy. Well, we see it all over the world. The idea of sacrificial clergy in African tribes and sacrificial clergy. You see, it's actually around the world. It's very rare to see
A sacramental.
religions where they have a priest that represents the deity. And I know there's going to be comments of, what about people who practice voodoo and they're possessed by spirits? Okay, when you're being ridden by one of them, that is a different thing. That is not, the person's identity is not starting to carry a component of the deity. If a deity is possessing that person, that's a different thing. That's not establishing that person's role in the culture as a clergy person, carrying some of the identity of deity. That's,
temporarily.
this evening, that person's being Papalegba, or that person is being ridden by Papalegba. That's a different thing entirely. But what we see around the world is mostly what we would call clergy in religions around the world, in these tribal religions, these ethnic religions, culturally institutionalized religions.
Folk traditions.
Not these universal religions that have this belief that they are the religion for all of the world, but these local tribal religions, however you want to call them, we see a lot of sacrificial clergy. We see a lot of their leaders work with the people and represent the people. Their identity just does not commingle with the identity of deity. That really came out of the Middle East, and it only came out of the Middle East around 2,000 years ago. It started to happen, and eventually, it swept across Europe like an infestation. That even changed the nature of the concept of nobility in Europe.
So here's a great question. With the focus here on sacrificial clergy and narrowing it down to Shintracht, how does one act in such way in accordance of following that path? How do you, maybe you're not a Drury, but maybe you're asked, even temporarily, within ritual, to be a sacrificer. Because, as you said, anybody could do that. We're gonna ask this person if they're okay with this before ritual. Would you mind doing some? You'll be the person. I mean, if they're gonna be doing sacrifices on our behalf, even
Yeah.
they would have to have some sort of mindset to at least understand the culture in the first place.
Well, yeah, you want, if you're going to have someone serve specifically as sacrificer, you probably should understand the nature of sacrifice. If a people pick out a person and say, hey, you're the one who knows the most of us about this, or the one we're comfortable with handing this over to the gods. We want you to carry this loaf of bread wade out into the sea and toss this loaf of bread to the gulls out there as you call Nananan. That's fine. That person is being put in that role again by the people. And whether that person carries that role for the duration of that ritual or the duration of that act, and they're acting in that capacity, or that person becomes, for an established group, the day in, day out person who does that. And you can say, oh, we don't have any Druid training programs, and we don't have anything to really, you can't call someone a Druid. Okay, maybe you can, maybe you can't. If you have a group that's been getting together for 30 years, and you have someone who's been studying for 30 years, and this is the person that you are most comfortable with leading your prayers and praying over your dead and putting you in the ground and blessing your children when they're born, that person is acting in that role, whether they've had the training, the probably 7 to 12 years of training that they would have had,
yeah.
or the if you want to listen to Roman sources, they had to study for a minimum of 20 years. Considering the life expectancy then, basically very few people would make it. So the system was probably a little more like what we see with the poetic system. Every year of study, they get a little bit better at their job, but they're in the job.
Mm-hmm.
So you can argue whatever you want to, but if you've got someone and they are acting for your group in that capacity, that person is your Bandrui, or that person is your Druid.
And like you mentioned,
they're functioning that way.
The people are the ones that choose, elect, or even it's a job. It's a social, even political role within that community, of which you're hired. You're hired to do this job. This is your job now.
So the people trust this person and say, we want you to speak this to the gods on these days. We want you to be the one who passes over this plate of meat to the Morrigan. And for those of you who are going to have comments about the evils of that it would be evil to do a blood sacrifice, I'm sorry. This is what's happening. It's happening all over the place. You don't have to like it. It's going on. C'est la vie.
Well, blood sacrifice is very important.
Am I sufficiently pissing off your viewers?
No.
It's not my intention.
No.
But my intention is also not to piss.
Yeah.
I don't intend to piss people off, but I'm also not sitting here not intending to piss people off. Just
Hitler didn't have intentions either. Hitler was going, happy trees, eat vegetables, happy. Fuck the trees, everybody must die.
I don't know. So yeah, that's understanding the nature of the different types of clergy, and then understanding what
Yeah.
our clergy are supposed to be. And the most important thing it allows people to do to understand that is you now will know when you get that odd feeling of, I've known this person for 10 years and he's just somehow something's changed and he stepped over the line. You now will be able to go, this is where he stepped over the line. He's no longer trying to speak for me to the gods. He turned around and tried to speak to the gods, or speak to me for the gods, something wasn't right. Now you've got an idea of, I'm feeling something isn't right. This is what I'm feeling isn't right. And I'm not talking about the time when the person does the divination and reads the divination or speaks the divination. That again is a different thing. They're not speaking for the gods. They're telling you what the gods are telling them.
Yeah.
And they're doing this one tiny thing. And again, acting as a diviner is not necessarily strictly limited to that one person. Anyone in the group could do it if they know how to do a divination. So at Lunasa, we throw 3 sickles and we look at how they land, and how they land tells us things. And a group of us usually walk over and look at them, and people will gather around and we talk about what we're seeing
Right in front of them.
with everybody there. And
It's not hidden from them.
And it's so no one's speaking for the gods. They just you ask the gods, what do they want you to know, and then you read the message. Anyone can read the telegraph that's coming in.
Yeah, well,
So again, acting as a diviner is not putting someone in the role of sacramental clergy, but in the community, it allows us to have that defined point, because you've done it before. I mean, you've been doing this for years. There's been a point where you've been looking at someone and you're going, something's changed.
Yeah.
Something's not right. This didn't feel right.
Oh yeah.
But at the time, were you able to go, this didn't feel right because X. This was where they stepped over the line. A lot of people are like, something's changed, but I don't know where they've stepped over the line. That's where somebody steps over the line, and that's where you look at them and you say, no, this is not our way. You have changed what you're doing. This is not the way of our people.
Oh yeah, I have a couple people that I know from my past.
Don't name names. It pisses people off.
No.
But
yeah,
people should know where they're seeing their leaders or the people who are experienced step over the line. But by really having the line clearly drawn, we know more about how not to step over that line.
Yeah.
As leaders. Because one of the most delusional things you can do, especially if you're in a leadership position, is go, oh, when he did it, that was an anomaly. He became a monster. That potential for fucking up, that potential for monstrosity is in everyone. It's in every leader. So if we know where that line is clearly there, we can look down and see our foot about to go over that line and go, oh yeah, that's I'm full of myself now.
Yeah.
So it stops us from going over that line and allows us to recognize when someone has.
Well, yeah, we have things in place though.
Some people have things in place.
I mean, well, the culture has things in place.
The culture always had things in place. I mean, what we know from Gaelic law systems and from the law systems of related Indo-European peoples, early on there was an idea that no one was outside of the laws. No one was above the laws, above the principles. Again, the truth of the king was the truth of the king because it worked in concert with the laws. The way you could tell the king was no longer a purveyor of truth is whenever the king was no longer working in concert with the laws. So Bress was a king, but when Bress started putting his farm or his warriors to work carrying wood, and when his poets could get no meat in his hall, and when his warriors and his druid were being used like slave labor and farm workers, he had overstepped that line. He was no longer doing what was right. So he was the king, but because he decided to do it, didn't make it right. He was no longer a truthful king because he was not working in concert with the idea of the professions. He was no longer honoring the producers, the farmers. He was no longer honoring the warriors, and he was no longer honoring the Nemid class, the Druid, the poets, the Fili. He was no longer honoring these people or giving them their due. So
he
had
stepped
failed.
outside of his role.
Exactly, and he failed as being the provider, and he failed in his piety when he failed the Nemid class.
There's a sacred
and
relationship.
He failed as a warrior, exactly, and he failed the warriors. So he had the three failings of a king, and he fell. Now, you could say, well, he was the king. He was making a new set of rules. And that's the truth of the king. That's not the truth of the king. The truth of the king would be to truly follow the way of the people.
Yes.
And he didn't follow the way of the people, and it ended in war.
Yeah, I guess you could say that the following the way of the
And he
people,
lost.
following the way of the people, is clearly representative of, where we have the division of the year with Samhain and Bealtaine, where the fires are lit. You have, where it's the focus at Samhain is Tara, and focus at Bealtaine would be, Ushnik, and it's the Druri. And both the Druri and the king are for the people, different aspects of the people.
Yeah.
It's not, I come into power and, what I say goes.
It's become hard in the modern world with this revival that's going on. It's become hard to have leaders, and a lot of groups have fallen apart because it didn't have leaders because A, they may not have been willing to have a leader, or B, their leader may have lost their grip on things. And the thing about it is, those leaders are the people that things organize around. It's part of the reason why things have remained so I'm not going to say disorganized, but unorganized.
Well, I mean, on behalf of
we don't
Shinshrak,
have those solid leaders. Now, within Shinshrak, there have been some people who have come up and been some good tribal leaders. There have been some good tribal leaders. I mean, I don't get along with my ex at all. She knew how to be a chieftain.
right. You can at least appreciate, she is good at this.
Yeah,
and this.
And
You just don't work.
Yeah, we don't work, but she knew how to be a chieftain, and then a lot of times that was just sit still and shut up.
That's a very good point that you've made a couple times through conversation. Is a good leader doesn't necessarily have to be the center of attention. Like you said, they're not on the bar lifting up their kilt, doing shots, and acting the maggot. They're the center because they're present. They're just there.
That's the point. It's the center. You have the sacred center represented in ritual. You have the sacred center represented in the cosmology, the kingship. And when we're talking about Gaelic kingship, we're not talking about kingship. Oh, the man on the mountain. We're talking about all of these different lords, whether it was a local cattle lord,
right?
This idea of leadership, from local cattle lords to tribal kings, which, in Ireland, the average size at one time, early, before the coming of Christianity, right around the time Christianity came in, the average tribal size was about 500 to 3,000 people. These tribes were small. They weren't like the gigantic tribes on the continent. They were tiny comparatively. And they had chieftains or a different type of king, different
people you could look
king,
to.
right?
You could look
and
to
you
this
had
person.
These provincial kings, and you had eventually this concept of a high king, which didn't really condense for centuries to an actual active high king.
Right.
But you had these ideas of kingship at these different levels, and here's the thing: they were not at levels from the top; they were at levels from the center.
Right.
So these people called their kings by their first name. They called them by their name.
Right.
And we even see it with clan chiefs today. Anyone in the clan uses the clan chief's first name. You don't call him or her. Good thing to note. There are plenty of female clan chiefs out there.
And good ones.
Yeah, some of the best clan chiefs right now are female.
Because some women can lead.
You know, it's just a fact of what's going on, but the clan chiefs are called by their name.
Right. There's no hoity-toity, fist to forehead.
There was no bowing and scraping. They were a leader, and it really is that idea of they become this point of centrality again, like the sacred center. They're that central point, that hitching post, but they're the hitching post for the social structures of the society.
Now, when you have
they're
these
that point that
concentric
connects
circles,
it to the ground, so they're like the hub on a wheel. They're like that axle, that the wheel turns around.
Yes.
They're like that point, and your next so-called level of leadership is the hub, and then you have these spokes, and you have this rim, and it's from the center to the edge. The same way you built your sacred space, the same way that map of Ireland you have on the wall there has these 4 provinces, and say the 4/5 of Ireland, and a little known detail is Wales was set up that way too at one point. And you have this idea of Meath, the middle, the center. So you have this sacred center. That was not just geography. That was not just cosmology. That was not just in liturgy for ritual. That was throughout the society.
Right.
That was the structure of the society. Even among the gods, when Lu was the king for a war, he was the king. And it didn't set him above anyone.
Right.
It set him right there in the center.
There's a sacred relationship.
They used to call him a great warrior, a great war leader. They would call him the beam of battle.
Yeah, ridge poles for
the,
your
the,
house.
The ridge pole. They would describe people as a ridge pole. Which, I mean, if we get to, think about the symbology of you have a high king who in one day, all of Skesha have been broken. It's in one day. He's in a house. It's being attacked. It's burning down. What's he killed by? He's the high king. He's killed by a falling ridgepole. Look at the symbology there. I've seen people who've read it dozens of times and never get the idea of the center was killed by the roof beam. The roof beam that was a total attack on the center at all levels.
Yeah. There's a sacred relationship between the social structure. The social structure isn't just like a working class. There is a sacred relationship between how the different peoples had value.
Yeah.
Right?
I like to say that there were no throwaway people.
No throwaway people.
You look at the law, there were no throwaway people. There were people who could push themselves to the point that they became outlawed and ostracized and put in a boat with no oars and hauled out beyond 9 waves and set adrift because of something they'd done. But there was no one who was born as a throwaway people. There were no untouchables.
We had laws to protect them.
People could do things that would end up with them being in servitude as a slave because of debts or something, but you did not have this big slave class. You did not have, you just didn't. There were no throwaway people, and that's important. Even people in the laws who don't have a honor prices or ranks because of their role.
Right.
That farmer and the people who are tended to be, it gets translated into English as unfree, the unfree classes, and people think, they were slaves or they were serfs.
That's different.
No, it's just that the concept there in the old Irish language, the concept there's just nothing in English we have to translate that into. They think of them as livers on the land. They lived on the land where they were.
Right.
And the vagaries of politics might shift who's the ruler of that space, but they're the livers on the land. They're not slaves. They were considered the unfree because they didn't hold command over certain amounts of property. What was I saying?
We were talking about sacred relationships.
Yeah, sacred relationships. So, the idea that no throwaway people. So you have someone who does not have their own, say, rank. But you know what? if you insulted the young man who tended to the geese for the king, and there's this old saying, someone has to tend the geese, and it's generally turned into an insult now, but it was an acknowledgement that everyone had a role, and someone might not be too quick. I mean, they may be slower than Forrest Gump, but they had a role that gave them honor within the society, even if that role was all they were fit to do was carry the water. But they could do it well, and they carried water in every day. They carried many buckets of water, or they tended the geese and they only had to be slightly smarter than the geese. That's fine. If you insulted that person, even if that person's not listed in the laws as having an honor price, you've insulted a member of the household of the king. The honor price you're going to pay is the honor price of the king. And that's, you know, when you look at the Irish laws, that's beautiful. This person had all of these protections.
Considering what was going on in the rest of the world, how the handicapped and elderly people and children and people had a voice within the community and could be protected by laws.
Yeah. There were certain legal cases for being insulted or being dishonored or embarrassed in public.
Fergus Kelly's book on Brehon law.
Which one? You mean the guide to early Irish law?
Yeah.
Because he's done some other stuff that's great too.
All of his stuff on law.
Yeah.
Fergus Kelly.
He's nice. He's a nice man. He's very, very smart, nice man. But anyway, what was I saying? I'm getting old.
You're not getting old. You're tired.
What was I saying?
I don't remember. Rewind it and then tell us. How about that?
No. So the I don't know, just the idea of no throwaway people that's important, because especially in today's society we have these ideas of throwaway people, this idea of people with no value. The legal cases that did not expire. If you didn't stand up for your rights when that person insulted you, you couldn't stand up for your rights when this other person insulted you. If you were publicly insulted, you had to stand up for yourself, or you lost the right. And certain cases could go long enough that they expired, but there are certain ones that did not expire. The case of, I don't know, people would translate the words as idiot, but we're really talking about someone who's we would think of as mentally slow. Forrest Gump, someone slower than Forrest Gump. They weren't necessarily expected to be able to go to the Brehons for justice if they've been insulted. It became the responsibility of their head of household or their chieftain, and if those people weren't there to do it, a war leader, or ultimately their king. It was their king's responsibility to bring their complaint so that their rights were protected. So the king didn't have a responsibility to say, hey, you can't insult one of my warriors. Hey, you can't insult that farmer over there. It's that farmer's job to go to the king and go, he insulted me and he does not have that right. But if it was someone who maybe had a head injury as a child and they're now kind of slow and they carry water and someone insults them or picks on them and they don't know what to do about it, it ultimately falls to that king to go, hey, you cannot do this to one of my people. You cannot do this to a member of my household. It really was a complex system, and okay, but it probably didn't work perfectly every time, but right. in concept, our legal system now certainly doesn't, but in concept, when you read what's there, it was set up beautifully.
When you throw the stone, the pebble into the pond, the center to the edge, well, if these people are towards the edge and they're bringing their complaint back, it's when it hits the edge and the ripples come back.
And that's the thing, and that has been a problem in the modern, I guess, pagan revival, is we have people who are leaders, and they don't have a clear model.
How do they become leaders?
Ancient clergy.
Are they self-appointed?
Yeah, sometimes they don't have a clear model of
the culture,
leadership within the ancient cultures.
Right. They're looking
They don't have a clear model of sacrificial clergy within these ancient
You
cultures.
get people that come out of neo-paganism into something more cultural, and they're still bringing neo-paganism into
Well, part of it is they've carried over a lot of the overculture's ideas into their neo-paganism, so they see leaders as
business.
up here
Right.
on at the top of the pyramid, and they start to see their clergy as sacramental clergy, or their clergy starts to see themselves as sacramental clergy.
Right.
So you have these things, within there were attempts to prevent that in neo-paganism, where it was like, well, everybody's a priest or a priestess. And that's fine, but you know that you still end up with the people who end up being. So they had to come up with this idea of, but we have a witch queen, and she's the priestess, the high priestess. Okay, you have the high priestess, and then over high priestesses you have the witch queen. At some point, you end up with that pyramid again, and in those ancient cultures we didn't get that pyramid. Hell, the reason the senators knifed Julius in the Senate was because they saw him as a threat to return to a kingship system that had a pyramid, because they had unfortunately lived under the Etruscan system, which was a pyramid scheme, and they were at the bottom. So they threw off the yoke of the Etruscans, and they became what we would later think of as Rome, and they had their Senate, and they were in their Republic period, and they had senators, and they had a couple of higher ranking senators, the praetors, who were just kind of managing everything. And then Julius Caesar became a praetor who began to amass power. They knifed him to try to prevent him from becoming king. That because they were sticking to that older system of there is no pyramid like that. Yeah, you do have the classes, but again, the classes, don't think of them as a pyramid with the upper class all the way down to the untouchables, the way it has unfortunately became in post-Vedic India. But
Right.
in post-Vedic India, where it became Hindu India, you started to have the class system really start to stratify. In those older systems, the systems we see reflected in that early Irish law, you're not seeing a stratification so much as a build-out.
And with this build-out, you can say, like, for an example, that I look at things oftentimes from a very utilitarian point of view, and focusing on these people's actually their real lives. And I don't try to romanticize about some sort of esoterica, but the relationship between a blacksmith and a carpenter. Yeah. The blacksmith is making these tools that the carpenter needs, and there's a symbiotic relationship,
Yeah.
And that existed between all peoples. Like you mentioned, with this person carries the water. We need water. We're busy farming. You get the water.
The word I like to use for that, I borrowed from its use from physics. Within the culture is entanglement.
Entanglement.
Where all parts are somehow entangled with all other parts.
The tapestry behind us is a beautifully woven, intricate tapestry. Through symbolism, you can clearly see how our people saw life. It's all entangled. Follow a thread.
I like that entanglement idea, and that's the thing about the people talk about, what was that ancient religion like? And it was like, well, really, it didn't exist as a separate component thing. The idea of a component religion that can be introduced to a people and laid over their culture as a separate theology and philosophy is only coming out of northern India about 2,600 years ago, and it made its way into Asia, made its way into the rest of Asia, because India was an Indo-European culture at the time. We tend to think Asia because we think geography, and it made its way to the Middle East, and eventually became those ideas of separate religions that can be taken to. The Buddhists 2,600 years ago invented the missionary. prior to that, you really didn't have them. You didn't have that idea of religion being a separate thing from the culture. There was just, there's the way of our people, and there's the way of your people, and there's the way of those people over there. And when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Why? Because you want to be Roman? No, because you're in Rome, and those happen to be the local gods. So make offerings at the local temples, because why do you piss off the local gods?
Right. Or, hey, we got that God, we just call him this, and he's a lot like that. He might be a little bit different here, so we're, as Romans, going to put this Roman name on this side of the altar, and on the other side, it's in Gallic.
Yeah, that was a Roman thing they were doing later on.
That was a Roman thing. They were occupying.
That was a Roman thing. But yeah, that idea of complete entanglement means that the religion wasn't a separate, defined religion. That's why we don't have ancient books on ancient religions, because we have
it was a way
myths.
of life.
We have myths, but the idea of what those myths represent and what goes on and what is there is completely entangled. You had
especially with
a
the
myth
language
of how that hill came into being when a goddess gave birth to it, and you have a myth of how a bull died and formed that mountain range over there, and you have a myth of, well, we have a border over there, that esker, that's our border. Well, that's where our god dragged his club, and that's the trackway he left in the dirt. And that river over there was born whenever a goddess challenged a well that was exclusive and only a few people were allowed to go to it, and she challenged it, and it chased her to the sea and killed her there, and she's the goddess of that river now. Those myths were real. They're in the world around you. They were completely entangled, and the fairies are there because they're completely entangled. And yes, they can be in the hills, but they can also be standing right there and you don't see them, and they can be the little bitty spirits that are running through the grass, and they can also be the ones that you stand there and go,
a shining.
People tend to think, oh, if they were the gods, they had to be the celestial gods, and it's like, oh man,
the gods can be what they want.
Get over it. Yeah, okay, there were some gods who were celestial gods, but pretty much most of them, they sweat and they bled and they were big, and they were bigger than us, but they were not, they were just, I mean, Govnu sweated next to the fire just like any smith does. I mean, he wasn't special just because he's a god. He's a damn fine smith, but he sweated over fire and probably burned himself off. And again, complete
Gwynedd was
entanglement, complete, just, there's not a point that can be separated.
Right. And I think that's going to leave us off at this
at
this topic right now. This video is going to end now because, number one, save for length. We're at about 48 minutes. We're leaving off right here on this topic for a part 2, and we're going to talk about magic.
Want me to piss people off.
We're going to talk about magic from the point of view of not necessarily this topic of how you might understand it of, there's Dryacht, there's Druid magic. Yeah, there was, but there was way much more. Way much. That's proper English, isn't it? Way much?
Sure. Mo better. The Mo better blues.
So, see you on part 2, Slongafol, and stick around, and we're going to do part 2 on magic. So, cheers.